We're also following the election results from this past weekend in Hungary, a huge story. Authoritarian leader Viktor Orban has been ousted from power after 16 years as prime minister. His likely successor, Peter Magyar, held a press conference yesterday following his party's win. Magyar said he won't be calling Russia's Vladimir Putin, but if Putin were to call him, he'd ask the Russian leader to end the killing and stop that war. Regarding the EU and the NATO alliance, Magyar said there are relevant issues that will require debate. But, quote, we are not going there to fight for the sake of fighting so we can write on billboards that Brussels is evil and needs to be stopped. Joe.
Yeah. And by the way, just one other thing is, I'm about to bring in somebody who has been a cold warrior, who understands the importance of pushing back against Russian authoritarianism. And this gets me back to the Pope. Isn't it crazy that everybody's fine on I'm sure J.D. Vance, if you ask J.D. Vance, who was a hero during the Cold War, he'd go, Pope John Paul II. Your father worked with Pope John Paul II very closely, and then the Reagan administration worked with Pope John Paul II very closely on political matters to help bring down the Soviet Union. So I guess it's good when they want to use the Pope and bad when they want to use the Pope. Very interesting. We'll see what happens the next time there's an abortion debate if J.D. decides to use the Catholic Church teaching and political reasons or not. With us now, let's bring an author and staff writer for The Atlantic, Anne Applebaum. Her latest piece on the election in Hungary is titled, Illiberalism is Not Inevitable. Also with us, the co-host of our 9 a.m. hour, staff writer at The Atlantic, Jonathan Lemire. We won't be going to him early this morning because of just how horridly the Red Sox played last night, along with Garrett Crochet, just our ace pitcher. No, this is going to hurt for a while. This is going to hurt for a while. What will not hurt, Ann, is something that did look inevitable for a very long time, Ann Applebaum, and that is the absolute thrashing of Orban and his coalition. Tell me what happened and talk about the long-term impact of this extraordinary news.
As you know, Joe, Orban spent 16 years in power, and during that time, he went right up to the edge of legality in seeking to control everything he could in the Hungarian state. So he controlled the bureaucracy, the judiciary, 90% of the media. He empowered a group of oligarchs to buy media properties for him, to fund his party. He himself funded this huge network of party propaganda using Hungarian state money. Peter Magyar had said so, started describing that yesterday. He gerrymandered his political system as much as he could. And yet, at the end of the day, the fact that he'd driven Hungary to the bottom of the European Union in economic statistics, in governance, in corruption, finally meant that there was a really significant vote against him. The opposition has won 2/3 of the seats in parliament, which will give them a constitutional majority. And the majority was so large that even Orban, who had made noises before the election about contesting, about, maybe he would have to cancel it because of foreign interference. There was some language on Election Day about alleged violence, which was invented. Even he had to concede. Presumably he'll keep trying to get back power some other way. But it's really a triumph for Hungarian organization, for the determination of Magyar and his team. They kept focused on a really broad grassroots campaign. They went round and round the country. He went to many towns and villages many times. He was doing 6 and 7 public meetings a day for the last few weeks. He had no access to media, no access to billboard space. All that was controlled by the government. And he won anyway. So it's a really important election. It's important for Europe because Hungary was the country that was doing Russia's bidding. They were blocking EU efforts to help Ukraine and to sanction Russia. Hungary was also a model for illiberal leaders all around the world. This election shows that there's nothing inevitable about illiberalism. The world is not trending in an authoritarian direction. It shows that Orban didn't have some kind of magic touch, and he was in touch with the real Hungarians as opposed to outsiders and foreigners. It's a really very, very important turning point.
Extraordinarily important turning point, not only for Hungary, also for Western democracy, for liberal democracy, a man who took pride in talking about being illiberal. Also, what we found out during the last few months of the campaign also is how closely tied Orban was to Putin, how closely tied Hungary was. It was like Hungary and both the foreign minister, when talking to Lavrov, and Orban, when talking to Putin, both made it very clear they considered themselves to be a satellite state, a vassal state of Putin's Russia, almost like it was 1975 or something like that. They told Putin outright they were going to do his bidding, which is what's so shocking to me about just one of the worst Wall Street Journal editorials, one of the most cynical Wall Street Journal editorials I've read in a very long time. And we usually quote them because on issues of freedom and democracy, they've been very good during the Trump administration. But yesterday they suggested, this was just libs crying wolf. There was never any real problem with Orban. I have tried to stop swearing in posts. But Ann, I wrote, what a cynical bad faith effort to suggest Orban was never a threat to Western democracy. The man was beaten despite being a willing pawn to Putin, destroying an independent judiciary, destroying a free press, destroying a fair political system. This is pure. And we dotted it out in case little Johnny's eating cereal at home. But that last word, unless our viewers can't forget it, is just pure bullshit. It really was one of the most cynical editorials I've seen in a long time. Suggesting that Cold Warriors like you were like some libs that were crying wolf. Explain. What was at stake there? What was at stake with the Law and Justice Party in Poland? You live it. You see it. I will never understand why Paul Gigot allowed this editorial to be printed. I know he can't believe that, but it was heinous.
Orban was not a conservative. By the end of his career, whatever he was at the beginning, by the end of his career, he was a radical. He was someone who was seeking to use state power to impose his version of culture, to favor his friends in the economy. This was not a free market economy in Hungary. This is nothing that the Wall Street Journal should feel linked to or proud to be connected to. This was somebody who turned Peter Magyar, the opposition leader's girlfriend. They made her into a spy for them. They bugged his phone. They had spies throughout all the opposition. I was in Hungary a year ago, talked to one of the opposition leaders who told me his wife had been fired from her job. She had a job in a cultural institution connected to the Hungarian government. They were persecuting people in the opposition. They hacked their data. They leaked it online with the implication that people should go after members of the opposition, trying to identify them. It was a very ugly, very very aggressive government, which, as I said, had nothing to do with conservatism in the old American sense at all. And as you say, the links to Russia were not superficial. So the leaked tapes, we have the audio and we have transcripts of conversations between Orban's foreign minister and Sergei Lavrov, who's the Russian foreign minister, offering to send him EU documents, telling him how he's blocking Ukraine, blocking the efforts of Ukraine at EU councils. And we have a very ugly conversation between Orban and Putin himself, where Orban describes himself as a mouse to Putin's lion. I mean, this is somebody who's been describing himself as a nationalist, and he cares about sovereignty, and he's in favor of, the Hungarian culture. And yet it turns out that he was in hoc to one of the worst and bloodiest and most repressive states in the on the planet,
right.
And he was acting
right.
on their behalf in Europe.
And here we had at the end, of course, Orban not being a mouse to Putin's lion, but a mouse to Hungary's popular sentiment, with Hungarians chanting in the final weeks of the campaign, "Russians go home." Again, I'm not exactly sure what great comfort the Wall Street Journal editorial page takes from that, but they were very clear. They understood just how dangerous Orban had gotten. And can you just give us an overview? We've talked a great deal about Twilight of Democracy. When you wrote that, you obviously had Poland on the brink with the Law and Justice Party. You had Orban getting more power by the day. You had Putin before, of course, having an extraordinary influence on Donald Trump and the American government. I love what you said, and I believe it, and I've always believed it. I've always been optimistic about this country. I've always been optimistic about Western democracy. Here we are 6, 7, 8, 9 years after Twilight of Democracy was written. Where are we today?
Well, Twilight of Democracy was about exactly this. It was about the radicalization of the center-right and how they became attracted to power, how they thought that once they attained power democratically, they could try to keep it forever, or they could change the rules so that they would never lose. We saw it happen in Hungary. We saw it happen in Poland. And of course, we're seeing it happen inside the United States. I mean, much of what Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have tried to do in government in this second Trump turn is exactly what Orban tried to do. In other words, to use their legitimate mandate as Democrats to change the political system, to create a one-party state so that they never lose. I really do feel people understand this phenomenon better now than they did 8 or 9 years ago. Hungarians came to understand it. Poles came to understand it. I think Americans are beginning to understand it, that as being elected doesn't mean you have the power to break the law. It doesn't mean you have the power to defy court orders. It doesn't mean that you have the power to completely transform the bureaucracy, to take away merit-based positions and give them to party hacks. I mean, all those things are detrimental to our political system and our system of governance. And I feel like people are beginning to understand better now what the risks are.
I can say for those of us, and I'm certainly not associating myself with all the extraordinary work you did and have done, but for those of us whose lives were defined, our early lives were defined by the Cold War, who looked up to Cold Warriors and understood that really was a fight for freedom, who believed that fight continues every single day in America, in Warsaw, in Budapest, across the West, even as we expand the boundaries of freedom. Anne Applebaum, I just want to say thank you so much for being here today, but more importantly, thank you for your work over the past decade. It's made such a big difference.
Thank you.